You can't possibly be serious. Those hairless primates? Chief Commander Drell Zar, though to any human it would have sounded like someone rapidly typing on a keyboard made of bone. I am entirely serious, Commander, replied Ambassador Zixvoth, her tentacle appendages rippling with anxiety. The intelligence reports are quite clear. The humans have claimed 17 worlds in the past 3 standard cycles. 17. And that's just their officially documented expansions. The gathered representatives of the Galactic Apex Hunter Alliance, or GAHA as humans would later mockingly refer to them, exchanged nervous glances around their crystalline war table. Their headquarters, nestled within the hollow moon of Clothara, had never felt so small. But they lack proper exoskeletons, protested General Vers of the Chelisrate Dominion, his 8 eyes blinking in asynchronous patterns of disbelief. They're basically walking water balloons. One puncture and they leak everywhere. Ambassador Zixvoth activated the holographic display with a wave of her upper tentacle. That's precisely what the Scourge Emperor thought before the humans. Well, the hologram flickered to life, displaying footage of a human settlement on Proxima Centauri B. It looked unremarkable at first. Domed structures, atmospheric processors, and some primitive ground vehicles. Then the image shifted to show a Scourge battlecruiser descending through the clouds, its kilometer-long hull bristling with plasma cannons and reality-shredding weaponry. The room fell silent as they watched what happened next. Captain Reese Blackwood was having a spectacularly ordinary Tuesday. He'd woken up, brushed his teeth with the last dregs of toothpaste. Mental note, pick up more from the commissary. Argued with the coffee dispenser until it produced something vaguely coffee-adjacent, and was now watching as an alien battlecruiser the size of Manhattan descended toward New Hope Colony with obvious hostile intent. Huh, he said, taking another sip of his not-quite-coffee. That's new. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Olivia Martinez, burst into the command center, her uniform hastily thrown on and her dark hair still wet from the shower. Sir, we have a situation. No kidding, Reese replied, gesturing toward the massive view screen displaying the approaching alien vessel. Got any ideas? Because I'm pretty sure our colony defense batteries weren't designed with cosmic horror from beyond the stars in mind. Olivia blinked at the screen, then at her captain, then back at the screen. Have we tried communicating with them? First thing I did, they responded with something that the translator interpreted as, prepare for harvest, protein sacks. Not super promising for diplomatic relations. Evacuation? There's 30,000 colonists here, Martinez. Even if we had enough shuttles, which we don't, there's nowhere to go. Proxima B isn't exactly flush with habitable real estate outside our atmospheric domes. Lieutenant Martinez approached the command console, studying the readouts of the alien ship. Sir, if I may, what exactly is our plan? Captain Blackwood finished his coffee, grimaced at the taste, and set the mug down with a decisive click. Plan? Oh, we're going to win, Lieutenant. Win. She said it flatly, not as a question, but as if testing whether the word had somehow changed meaning overnight. Absolutely. He pressed a button on his console. Defense Command, this is Captain Blackwood. Activate Protocol Rude Awakening. There was a pause, and then a voice responded. Sir, are you sure? That's only theoretical. We've never actually... Do it. The assembled Apex Hunters watched in stunned silence as the footage continued. The human settlement, which had appeared defenseless, suddenly sprouted hundreds of concealed missile silos. But instead of conventional weapons, each silo launched what appeared to be small metal pods. What are those? Asked War Prince Cathavar of the Silicon Hegemony. Ambassador Zixvoth's voice was barely above a whisper. They call them angry bees. The pods, thousands of them, swarmed toward the Scourge battlecruiser with surprising speed. The massive ship's point defense systems activated, destroying hundreds of the tiny projectiles, but there were simply too many. They impacted against the battlecruiser's hull, and instead of exploding, they attached themselves. I don't understand, said General Vers. What are they doing? The footage zoomed in on one of the pods. It had sprouted mechanical legs and was using what appeared to be a miniaturized plasma torch to cut through the battlecruiser's supposedly impenetrable armor. They're boarding it, Zixvoth explained. Each pod contains a single human soldier in what they call environmental battle armor. The pods are designed to breach hulls and deploy their occupants directly into enemy vessels. That's insane, sputtered Chief Commander Drell Zar. Who would willingly launch themselves at relativistic speeds into an enemy warship? The G-forces alone would... They have a technology they call inertial dampeners, Zixvoth interrupted. And as for who would volunteer for such missions, Well, humans apparently have a waiting list. The footage continued, showing the Scourge battlecruiser listing to one side as internal explosions rippled through its hull. In less than 20 minutes, the mighty vessel, pride of the Scourge fleet and terror of 3 spiral arms, began an uncontrolled descent toward the planet's surface, eventually crashing in an uninhabited region thousands of kilometers from the human settlement. Search teams dispatched to the crash site found no survivors among the Scourge crew. What they did find, however, were all 2,457 human soldiers, celebrating their victory by planting a flag in the wreckage, and, according to intelligence reports, hosting something called a barbecue, using parts of the ship's fusion reactor as a grill. That's one incident, Chief Commander Drelzar said, his mandibles now perfectly still. Perhaps the Scourge were careless. The Scourge, Zixvoth reminded him, have subjugated 13 species and destroyed 7 others. They were not careless. They were outmatched by a species that, by all logic, should have surrendered immediately. What about their physiology? Asked War Prince Kuthvar. Surely we can exploit their biological weaknesses. They require oxygen, do they not? And their internal temperature regulation is primitive at best. Ambassador Zixvoth flicked through several data screens with her tentacles. Their environmental suits negate most physiological vulnerabilities. But more concerning is their adaptability. Observe. Another hologram appeared, showing a human outpost on what appeared to be an ice planet. The temperature readout at the bottom of the display showed ambient conditions of -70 degrees Celsius. This is their mining colony on Europa, one of the moons of their origin system's gas giant. Notice anything unusual? The Apex hunters studied the footage. Humans were moving about outside their habitats, operating machinery, with minimal protective gear beyond insulated clothing. How are they not freezing? Asked General Vers. They've genetically modified themselves, Zixvoth explained. This particular subgroup of humans has enhanced cold tolerance through a combination of increased brown fat deposits and what they call antifreeze proteins derived from Arctic fish. Status report, O'Malley, came Captain Blackwood's voice through his earpiece. Devon paused his crawling to check the holographic display on his wrist. About 30 meters from the main power coupling, Captain. No resistance so far. These bug guys really don't believe in security cameras in their ventilation systems. Don't get cocky. The Scourge have infrared sensing organs. They might not need cameras. Roger that, Devon replied, patting the device clipped to his belt. Good thing we came prepared. The device, lovingly nicknamed Cold Shoulder by its R&D designers, was emitting a field that masked Devon's heat signature, essentially rendering him invisible to infrared detection. It wasn't perfect. It couldn't actually cool him down without killing him, so instead it created a sort of thermal hologram that made him appear to be part of the background temperature. Devon continued his progress through the ducts, occasionally consulting the 3D map projected by his wrist device. The map was being updated in real time as other members of the strike team fed data back to the colony's defense command. Hey, Captain, Devon whispered after a few more minutes of crawling. I've been thinking. Always dangerous, Specialist. Haha. But seriously, why do alien ships always have ventilation ducts big enough for humans to crawl through? It seems like a major design flaw. There was a pause before Captain Blackwood replied. These aliens are 3 meters tall with exoskeletons, O'Malley. Their maintenance workers are probably the size of bears. These ducts aren't designed for humans to crawl through. They're designed for Scourge workers, and we're just small enough to take advantage of that. Oh. Devon considered this. So we're basically vermin to them. More like parasites, but yes. Cool. Always wanted to be the alien equivalent of a tapeworm. Devon arrived at a junction in the ventilation system and checked his map again. Taking a left here. Should be approaching the power coupling soon. Remember the plan. Plant the charges, set the timer for 15 minutes, and get back to your entry point. The extraction pods will be waiting. 15 minutes? Why so long? Because, Captain Blackwood said with audible patience, we need time to evacuate all our people before this thing goes boom. This isn't a suicide mission, Specialist. Devon grinned to himself as he crawled onward. Where's the fun in that? A few minutes later, he arrived at a large ventilation grill overlooking what had to be the main power coupling. A massive crystalline structure pulsing with energy, surrounded by alien technicians scuttling about on too many legs. I've got eyes on the target, he whispered into his comm. Moving to place charges now. Carefully, Devon removed the ventilation grill and set it aside. He then began extracting the specialized explosive devices from his backpack, sleek, matte black cylinders with glowing blue indicators. Each one was powerful enough to level a small building, and he had 6 of them. As he was placing the third charge, his elbow knocked against the ventilation shaft, causing a metallic ping that echoed through the chamber below. All movement among the Scourge technicians ceased. As one, they turned their compound eyes upward. "Uh-oh," Devon muttered. One of the aliens emitted a series of rapid clicks and whirs, presumably their language, and pointed directly at Devon's position. Alarm klaxons immediately began blaring throughout the ship. "O'Malley!" Captain Blackwood's voice crackled in his ear. "What's happening?" "Minor complication," Devon replied, hastily attaching the remaining explosives to the shaft wall. "I've been spotted. Setting charges now." "Get out of there immediately!" "Working on it." Devon activated the timer on the charges, but instead of 15 minutes, he set it for 3. Then he turned and began crawling back the way he had come, moving as fast as the confined space would allow. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of alien appendages trying to access the ventilation shaft. A quick glance at his wrist display showed multiple heat signatures converging on his position from different directions. "They're in the vents," he reported, breathing heavily as he picked up speed. "Multiple hostiles converging on my position. Can you make it to the extraction point?" Devon checked his map. "Negative. They're blocking my route. I need an alternate exit strategy." There was a pause, then. "There's an external maintenance hatch 2 junctions ahead on your right. It leads to the outer hull. We can position an extraction pod there, but you'll have about 45 seconds of vacuum exposure." "My suit can handle that," Devon said, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. The environment suits were rated for brief vacuum exposure, but 45 seconds was pushing it. "It'll have to," Captain Blackwood replied grimly, "because those charges are going to blow in." "About 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Devon finished. "Yeah, I may have adjusted the timer a bit." "You what?" "They saw me. If I set it for 15 minutes, they'd have plenty of time to disarm the charges. This way, they're too busy chasing me to worry about them." "And if you don't make it out in time?" Devon grinned despite the gravity of the situation. "Then I guess I'll go out with a bang, sir." He could practically hear Captain Blackwood's eye roll through the comm. "Just get to that maintenance hatch, O'Malley. That's an order." "Yes, sir." Devon reached the junction and took the right turn, crawling faster now as he heard the alien scuttling growing louder behind him. Up ahead, he could see the maintenance hatch, a circular portal with what appeared to be a rotating locking mechanism. "I can see the hatch," he reported. "Approaching now." Just as he reached the hatch, a section of the ventilation shaft behind him tore open, and a Scourge soldier thrust its head and upper limbs into the passage. Its compound eyes locked onto Devon, and its mandibles clicked in what he could only assume was alien rage. "Hi there," Devon said, offering a little wave with his free hand while his other hand worked the hatch mechanism. "Don't suppose you'd believe I'm doing routine HVAC maintenance." The alien let out a screech and lunged forward, its clawed appendages narrowly missing Devon's boots as he pushed the hatch open and propelled himself through it, straight into the cold vacuum of space. Immediately, his suit's emergency systems activated, sealing all possible leaks and stiffening to maintain pressure. Devon felt the saliva on his tongue begin to boil before his helmet fully pressurized, and his ears popped painfully. "I'm outside the ship!" He gasped into his comm, the words feeling strange in his mouth as his suit compensated for the lack of external atmosphere. "Where's my ride?" "Look to your 3 o'clock, came the reply. "Extraction pod inbound, 30 seconds. Devon turned his head and saw a small, bullet-shaped pod rocketing toward him from the direction of the colony. His suit's oxygen reserves were already at 80% and dropping. The vacuum was finding microscopic leaks despite the suit's best efforts. Behind him, the maintenance hatch opened again, and a Scourge soldier emerged, apparently wearing some kind of vacuum-adapted armor. It oriented itself and began moving toward Devon with surprising grace, using the ship's hull as leverage. "I've got company!" Devon warned, pushing off from the hull to put distance between himself and the alien. The movement sent him tumbling into open space, away from both the ship and his approaching extraction pod. "Stabilize yourself," Captain Blackwood ordered. "Use your maneuvering thrusters." Devon fumbled for the controls on his wrist, activating the suit's small hydrogen peroxide thrusters. Jets of steam shot from his shoulders and hips, arresting his tumble and allowing him to reorient himself toward the approaching extraction pod. The Scourge soldier, however, had launched itself directly at him, its multiple limbs outstretched like some nightmarish spider. 20 seconds to extraction, came the update in his ear. "Might need to speed that up a bit," Devon replied, activating his thrusters again to dodge the alien's lunge. In the vacuum, the movement was eerily silent, just the soldier's armored form sailing past him, trailing vapor from its own propulsion system. Devon's oxygen reserves hit 60%. His extremities were beginning to tingle from the cold seeping through his suit, and he could feel his heartbeat accelerating as his body struggled against the hostile environment. The extraction pod was close now, perhaps 50 meters away and closing fast. Its automated systems had spotted him and were making course corrections to intercept. The Scourge soldier had recovered from its missed attack and was reorienting for another pass. This time, it fired something from a wrist-mounted weapon, a thin filament that shot toward Devon like a harpoon. "Look out!" someone shouted through the comm, but it was too late. The filament wrapped around Devon's leg, and the alien began reeling him in. 10 seconds to extraction! Devon reached down to his utility belt and unclipped a small device, one of the few offensive weapons he'd brought along. It looked like a simple ball bearing, but when he squeezed it and tossed it toward the filament, it exploded in a shower of superheated plasma that severed the alien tether. Free again, Devon redirected himself toward the extraction pod, which was now close enough that he could see its entry hatch opening like a mechanical maw. 5 seconds! The Scourge soldier fired another filament, but this one went wide as the alien itself was forced to evade a sudden barrage of covering fire from the colony's defense platforms. Beams of coherent light sliced through the vacuum, forcing the soldier back toward the battlecruiser. 3, 2, 1. Devon collided with the extraction pod's open hatch, his momentum carrying him inside as the automated systems immediately began closing the door behind him. The pod's interior pressurized rapidly, and oxygen-rich air flooded in, causing him to gasp in relief. "I'm in," he managed between breaths. "Get me out of here." The extraction pod's engines fired at full power, accelerating away from the battlecruiser just as Devon's charges detonated. The massive explosion tore through the ship's power core, causing secondary detonations that rippled along its hull. From the pod's view screen, Devon watched as the mighty vessel began to break apart, its structural integrity compromised beyond recovery. "Mission accomplished," he reported, allowing himself to sink back into the pod's padded interior. "Though I may have singed my eyebrows a bit." "Good work, Specialist," Captain Blackwood's voice replied, now coming through the pod's communication system rather than his helmet. "We'll discuss your unauthorized timer adjustment during the debriefing." Devon grinned. "Looking forward to it, sir." As the extraction pod rocketed back toward the colony, Devon couldn't help but think that for all their technological might, the aliens had made one critical mistake. They had assumed humans would behave logically. They had built their ship to withstand frontal assaults from capital ships, not infiltration by creatures willing to crawl through maintenance ducts with backpacks full of explosives. It was a mistake most species only made once when dealing with humanity. "They weaponize everything," Ambassador Zixvoth explained as the footage ended. "Their scientific development isn't guided by theoretical advancement or spiritual awakening, but by a simple question. How can we use this to protect ourselves or destroy our enemies?" "That seems primitive," said War Prince Kathavar. "Effective," corrected General Vers, who had developed a grudging respect for the humans' approach. "Primitive would be sticks and stones. They've developed antimatter containment, controlled fusion, and quantum entanglement communication, all originally for military applications. What's most concerning," continued Zixvoth, "is their rate of technological advancement. Most species discover faster-than-light travel approximately 10,000 standard years after developing agriculture. Humans did it in less than 12,000 years from their first primitive tools to their first FTL jump. And now that they have access to galactic archives through salvaged alien technology, they're accelerating," finished Chief Commander Drelzar, his mandibles clicking nervously. "How many ships do they have?" Zixvoth's tentacles rippled in the equivalent of a shrug. "That's the other problem. They don't rely solely on large capital ships like most civilized species. Their fleet architecture is unconventional." Another hologram appeared, showing a bewildering array of human vessels ranging from massive carriers to tiny one-person fighters. "They believe in redundancy and specialization," she explained. "Rather than building a few perfect ships, they build many different types for specific purposes. Carriers, destroyers, corvettes, fighters, bombers, electronic warfare platforms, stealth vessels. The list goes on." "That's inefficient," protested War Prince Kathavar. "The resources required to maintain such diversity are justified by their effectiveness in combat," interrupted General Vers. "I'm beginning to understand their strategy. By fielding many different vessel types, they create complexity that's difficult to counter with a single approach." "Precisely," confirmed Zixvoth. And most concerning of all is their concept of asymmetric warfare. When outmatched, they don't surrender or fight honorably to the death. They change the rules of engagement entirely. She showed footage of a small human vessel approaching a much larger alien ship. Instead of opening fire, the human ship launched what appeared to be debris toward the alien vessel. "What are they doing?" asked Chief Commander Drelzar. "Launching garbage," Zixvoth replied. "Specifically, metal shavings and ceramic particles, at relativistic speeds." The Apex hunters watched as the cloud of debris impacted the alien vessel, tearing through its hull like hypervelocity bullets. The larger ship never had a chance to return fire. Its systems were compromised almost instantly, leaving it dead in space. "They call it a kingfisher strike," Zixvoth explained. "Named after a bird from Earth that catches fish by diving into water. Simple, effective, and nearly impossible to defend against without advance warning." "This is not how civilized species conduct warfare," protested Chief Commander Drelixar. "Perhaps that's why civilized species keep losing to them," General Vers observed dryly. "The most disturbing aspect," continued Zixvoth, "is their ability to turn anything into a weapon. Observe." The hologram changed again, showing what appeared to be normal asteroid mining operations. Humans in specialized vessels were attaching propulsion units to large asteroids, presumably to move them to processing facilities. "This footage was taken near their colony in the Tau Ceti system," Zixvoth explained. "Standard resource extraction operations." "I don't understand," said War Prince Kathavar. "What's concerning about mining?" "Nothing, until you realize those same techniques can be used to propel asteroids toward enemy planets," Zixvoth replied. "They call it kinetic bombardment. No need for expensive antimatter warheads or exotic weapons. Just drop a large rock from orbit and let gravity do the work." The gathered representatives fell silent again, contemplating the implications. Finally, Chief Commander Drelzar spoke. "So what are our options? If these humans are as dangerous as you suggest, Ambassador, we cannot allow them to continue expanding unchecked." Zixvoth's tentacles writhed in a pattern indicating extreme caution. "That's why I've called this meeting. I believe we have 3 options." She raised one tentacle. "First, we can attempt to contain them by establishing buffer zones around their territory and heavily militarizing the borders." A second tentacle rose. "Second, we can try to negotiate an alliance, bringing them into the fold of galactic civilization and hopefully moderating their more aggressive tendencies through cultural exchange." "And the third option?" asked General Vers, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Zixvoth's third tentacle rose slowly. "We launch a preemptive strike with our combined forces. Hit them hard, hit them fast, before they grow any stronger." The chamber erupted in overlapping voices as the representatives debated the merits of each approach. War Prince Cathvar advocated for containment, arguing that direct conflict would be too costly. General Vers favored alliance, suggesting that human ingenuity could be redirected toward common threats. Chief Commander Drelzar, however, insisted that preemptive action was the only logical choice. As the debate reached its peak, a chime sounded throughout the chamber, silencing all discussion. "What is that?" demanded Chief Commander Drelzar. Ambassador Zixvoth checked her communication device, her tentacles suddenly going rigid with shock. "It appears we have a visitor. Who would dare interrupt a High Council meeting of the Apex Hunters?" War Prince Kthavar's crystalline form vibrated with indignation. The chamber's massive doors slid open, revealing a figure that seemed almost comically small compared to the assembled alien representatives. A human, dressed in a simple blue uniform with minimal ornamentation, walked calmly into the center of the room. "Greetings," said the human, offering a slight bow. "I am Admiral Elena Kostova of the United Earth Fleet. I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you're discussing matters that directly concern my species, and I thought it might be productive to have a representative present." "How did you find this place?" demanded Chief Commander Drelzar, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. "This moon is shielded from all conventional detection methods." Admiral Kostova smiled pleasantly. "Yes, it is. Very impressive technology. We've been trying to reverse engineer it from the data we gathered when we planted the listening devices 6 months ago." A stunned silence fell over the chamber. "You've been spying on us?" War Prince Kethavar's voice carried both outrage and disbelief. "Spying is such a loaded term," the Admiral replied with a dismissive wave. "We prefer preemptive intelligence gathering. And before you ask, yes, we've heard every word of today's meeting." She turned to address Ambassador Zixvoth directly. "Your assessment of our capabilities was impressively thorough, Ambassador, though I must point out that the Kingfisher strike footage you showed was actually from a training exercise. In real combat situations, we use a much higher density of projectiles. Ambassador Zixvoth's tentacles coiled tightly against her body, a sign of extreme distress in her species. Admiral, your presence here is a violation of galactic diplomatic protocols. Perhaps, Kostova acknowledged with a shrug. But I thought it more efficient than waiting for you to reach a decision and then having to respond to it. This way, we can cut through several cycles of posturing and get straight to meaningful dialogue. She approached the crystalline war table and, without asking permission, activated its holographic interface. A new image appeared, a detailed map of human territory in relation to the various domains of the apex hunter species. You've been discussing 3 options, the Admiral continued. Containment, alliance, or preemptive strike. Allow me to save you some time by addressing each one. She pointed to the map. Containment would require establishing buffer zones here, here, and here. The problem is, we're already established in these regions through colony worlds or mining operations. You'd effectively be asking us to abandon sovereign territory, which is a non-starter. General Vers leaned forward, his 8 eyes fixed on the human. And alliance? Admiral Kostova smiled. A much more promising avenue. Humanity has always valued cooperation, when it's equitable. We'd be open to discussing trade agreements, technology exchange, mutual defense pacts, the usual foundations of interspecies relations. And if we chose the 3rd option? Asked Chief Commander Drelgzar, his voice dangerously quiet. The Admiral's smile faded. Then I would strongly advise against it, Commander. Not as a threat, but as a genuine concern for the welfare of all our species. With another gesture, she changed the holographic display to show what appeared to be ordinary human civilian ships, transport vessels, mining platforms, colony ships. Then, with a subtle movement of her hand, the images transformed, revealing hidden weapon systems, armor plating beneath civilian facades, and military-grade propulsion systems. Every human vessel is built with contingencies in mind, she explained. Even our civilian ships can be rapidly converted for combat if necessary. It's not because we're inherently warlike, it's because we evolved on a planet where preparedness meant survival. You're saying your entire civilian fleet is actually a sleeper armada? War Prince Kathavar's crystalline structure vibrated with alarm frequencies. I'm saying we believe in redundancy, corrected the Admiral. And while individually, none of your species might pose an existential threat to humanity, collectively. She gestured around the chamber. Well, we take the Apex Hunter Alliance very seriously indeed. Is that a threat, Admiral? Demanded Chief Commander Drelzar. Not at all, she replied calmly. It's an invitation to understand each other better. You see, there's something Ambassador Zixvoth's excellent briefing didn't fully capture about humans. The Admiral walked slowly around the table, making eye contact with each representative. We are indeed adaptable, resourceful, and yes, sometimes aggressive when threatened. But we're also compassionate, curious, and eager to connect with other intelligent life. We don't want to conquer the galaxy, we just want our place in it. She stopped beside Zixvoth. The Ambassador showed you examples of humans fighting back when attacked. What she didn't show you were the 17 peaceful first contact scenarios we've had, or the thriving trade relationships we've established with the Arcturian Collective, or the joint scientific outpost we maintain with the Proxima Indigenous Intelligence. Those are minor species, dismissed Chief Commander Drelzar. Not apex predators like ourselves. Admiral Kostova raised an eyebrow. Is that how you see yourselves? Interesting. We don't categorize species by their predatory status. We evaluate them as potential friends, neutral parties, or threats, based entirely on their actions, not their evolutionary history. She returned to the center of the chamber. I came here today not to intimidate you, but to extend an invitation. In 3 standard cycles, Earth will be hosting a galactic cooperation summit. Representatives from 37 spacefaring species will be attending to discuss everything from trade to cultural exchange to shared environmental concerns. We would be honored if the Apex Hunter Alliance would send delegates. With that, she placed a small device on the war table, a holographic invitation that expanded to display details of the summit. The choice, of course, is yours, she continued. You can view humanity as a threat to be contained or eliminated, or as a potential ally with much to offer. But I would suggest that in a galaxy full of wonders and dangers we have yet to discover, having more friends is generally preferable to having more enemies. The chamber remained silent as the representatives exchanged glances. nonverbal communications passing between them in the subtle languages of their respective species. Finally, it was General Vers who broke the silence. You infiltrated our most secure facility, the hidden headquarters of the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy, just to deliver a party invitation? The general's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. Admiral Kostova smiled. When you put it that way, it does sound a bit excessive. But first impressions matter, don't they? And I wanted to make it clear that humans value directness and transparency. By spying on us? Chief Commander Drelzar clicked sarcastically. By knowing who we're dealing with, the Admiral corrected. Just as you've been gathering intelligence on us. That footage of the Proxima Centauri incident wasn't exactly taken with permission, was it? Ambassador Zix-Voth's tentacles rippled with discomfort. How did you get past our security systems? This moon has quantum entanglement scanners, phase-shifted detection grids, and psychic dampening fields. Yes, very impressive technology, Admiral Kostova agreed, taking a seat at the war table as if she'd been invited to join them. The chair, designed for beings twice her size, made her look like a child at an adult's table, but somehow she still commanded the room's attention. We had our best minds working on the problem. As it turns out, the best way past your security was... Well, I'm not sure you'd believe me if I told you. Try us, War Prince Kuthavar challenged. The Admiral shrugged. We walked in through the front door. Impossible, scoffed Chief Commander Drelzar. Our entrances are guarded by chrono-locked portals that only materialize for authorized biopatterns, Kostova finished for him. Yes, we know. Fascinating technology. The thing is, your authorization system is based on recognizing specific neural patterns and quantum biomarkers unique to your species. It never occurred to you to program it to actively reject human patterns because, until recently, you didn't consider us worth worrying about. The Apex hunters exchanged uncomfortable glances. So, the Admiral continued pleasantly, when our infiltration team approached your entry points, the system had no specific instructions to keep us out. It was the equivalent of finding a members-only club that never bothered to define who couldn't be a member. General Vers made a sound that might have been a laugh, if insects could laugh. Clever. Most species would have tried to hack the system or force their way in. That would have triggered your defenses, Kostova replied. We preferred the path of least resistance. It's a very human approach. Why break down a door when you can find a key? Chief Commander Drelzar's compound eyes narrowed. And now that you've delivered your invitation, what happens next? Are we to believe you came alone? That there aren't human warships waiting outside our system? The Admiral's expression grew serious. Commander, if we wanted to attack this facility, we wouldn't have sent me in for a chat first. That's not how humans wage war. How do humans wage war, Admiral? Asked War Prince Kothavar, his crystalline form glinting in the chamber's light. Reluctantly, she replied, but thoroughly. We prefer not to fight at all, despite what you might think from the incidents you've observed. Those were defensive actions against aggressors. But when we do fight, she sighed, we commit fully. We don't believe in limited engagements or symbolic victories. We fight to win, decisively, so we don't have to fight the same enemy twice. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The implication was clear and chilling. But, the Admiral continued, her tone brightening, that's precisely why I'm here. To make sure we never have to find out which side would prevail in such a conflict. Because regardless of who won, the cost would be devastating for all involved. Ambassador Zix-Voth's tentacles performed a complex gesture that translated roughly as cautious agreement. Your candor is refreshing, Admiral. Most species would approach this situation with more diplomatic obfuscation. Life's too short for that, Kostova replied with a slight smile. Even with our advanced medical technology, the average human only lives about 130 years. We've learned not to waste time talking in circles. A practical approach, acknowledged General Vers. But you must understand our concern. Your species has expanded rapidly, militarized aggressively, and demonstrated remarkable aptitude for warfare despite your relative youth as a spacefaring civilization. All true, the Admiral nodded. Because we exist in a dangerous galaxy. The first aliens humanity encountered tried to harvest us for biological materials. The second attempted to colonize our homeworld. By the time we met anyone friendly, we'd already learned hard lessons about galactic realities. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. But consider this. Despite those early experiences, We haven't launched any unprovoked attacks against other species. We haven't attempted to conquer inhabited worlds or forced our culture on others. We've defended ourselves, yes, but we've also established diplomatic relations, trading partnerships, and cultural exchanges wherever possible. And what guarantees do we have that this behavior will continue as your power grows? Asked Chief Commander Drelazar. Admiral Kostova spread her hands. The same guarantee any species has about another. Mutual self-interest and the foundations of trust we build together. That's why I'm inviting you to the summit. It's why I'm here, unarmed, in your secure facility. We're extending our hand, metaphorically speaking, and hoping you'll take it. Back on Earth, in the Unified Defense Command headquarters beneath the rebuilt city of Geneva, a team of senior military officials and civilian leaders watched the encounter through Admiral Kostova's ocular feed. The room was tense, all eyes fixed on the massive display showing the alien representatives from the Admiral's perspective. "She's taking one hell of a risk," muttered General Takashi Yamamoto, drumming his fingers nervously on the conference table. "If they decide to detain her, or worse, we have no extraction plan that wouldn't trigger an interstellar incident." Dr. Amelia Wells, the civilian head of xenopolitical strategy, shook her head. "It's a calculated risk, General. The psychological profile we've built of the Apex Hunter leadership suggests they respect boldness. A traditional diplomatic approach would have been interpreted as weakness. Besides," added Director of Intelligence Felix Okafor, "Admiral Kostova volunteered for this mission specifically because of her background in xenopsychology. She understands the cultural nuances at play better than anyone, and the quantum entanglement communicator implanted in her cerebral cortex allows us real-time observation and, if necessary, guidance." "Still doesn't mean I have to like it," Yamamoto grumbled. "One wrong word, one misinterpreted gesture, and we could be looking at a conflict with the 7 most militarily advanced species in the known galaxy." "Which is precisely why traditional diplomacy wouldn't work," Dr. Wells insisted. "The Apex Hunters don't respect protocol and pleasantries. They respect strength, courage, and direct action. Admiral Kostova giving them a demonstration of our intelligence capabilities while simultaneously offering peaceful cooperation is exactly the right approach." On the display, they watched as the alien representatives continued their discussion with the Admiral. The translation software provided real-time subtitles of the various alien languages, though much of their communication remained nonverbal. Shifts in posture, colors, and movements that the software was still learning to interpret. "Look at that," Director Okafor pointed. "The Silicon Hegemony representative, War Prince Kthavar. His crystalline structure is vibrating at frequencies associated with thoughtful consideration, not aggression. And General Verz's eye patterns suggest curiosity rather than hostility." "What about the big bug?" asked Yamamoto, indicating Chief Commander Drelzar. "He still looks like he wants to eat her." Dr. Wells smiled. "The arthropodians don't eat prey that way, General. And while the commander is clearly suspicious, his mandible posture indicates he's in an information-gathering mode, not a pre-attack stance." "Leaders of Earth," a new voice spoke, causing everyone in the room to turn toward the doorway where President Alejandro Rivera had entered. "What's our status?" Everyone stood respectfully as the president approached the main display. "Admiral Kostova has made contact with the Apex Hunter Council and delivered our invitation to the summit," reported Dr. Wells. "Initial responses are cautious, but not overtly hostile." The president nodded, his weathered face serious as he studied the alien representatives on the screen. "And our contingency plans?" "The 6th Fleet remains at high alert in the Kuiper Belt," General Yamamoto replied. "Stealth platforms are deployed throughout the Sol system. At the first sign of hostile action, we can have reinforcements at the Clothara Moon within 6 hours via jump point." "And the Admiral's extraction options?" Director Okafor cleared his throat. "Limited, Mr. President. The facility's defenses would make a conventional extraction challenging. However, Admiral Kostova is equipped with a quantum fold device. Worst-case scenario, she can activate it and return to Earth instantly. At the cost of revealing one of our most advanced technologies," the President noted with a frown. "Better than losing one of our best officers," Dr. Wells countered. President Rivera nodded slowly. "Agreed. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. The Admiral seems to be handling the situation well." Indeed, on the screen, they could see that the conversation had shifted to a more constructive tone. The alien representatives were now examining the details of the summit invitation. asking questions about logistics and security arrangements rather than issuing threats. "She's doing it," Dr. Wells whispered, a note of awe in her voice. "She's actually bringing them around." Back in the Apex Hunter Council chamber, Admiral Kostova was answering a barrage of questions from the assembled representatives. "Yes, we would provide secure accommodations for all delegates," she explained patiently. "Each species would have quarters specifically designed to meet their biological needs: atmospheric composition, gravity, temperature, and so on." "And weapons?" asked General Vers. "Surely you don't expect us to attend unarmed?" "Ceremonial weapons only," the Admiral replied firmly. "Just as I came here today. We understand the cultural significance of certain armaments for your species, but the summit is a place for words, not war preparations." Chief Commander Drelzar clicked his mandibles skeptically. And what exactly would be accomplished at this summit? Flowery speeches and meaningless platitudes? "Concrete results," Kostova corrected. "Trade agreements, non-aggression pacts, establishment of neutral zones, cultural exchange programs, joint scientific ventures. The foundations of a stable, mutually beneficial relationship between our civilizations." "Why should we trust humans to honor such agreements?" War Prince Kathavar asked, his crystalline form oscillating with skepticism. "Your species has demonstrated remarkable adaptability in interpreting rules and finding loopholes." Admiral Kostova smiled. "A fair point. Which is why all agreements would be subject to verification protocols and regular review. Trust, but verify. An old human saying that has served us well." She stood up from the oversized chair, straightening her uniform. "But I think the real question is, can any of us afford not to try? The alternative is perpetual suspicion, arms races, buffer zones, and the constant threat of misunderstandings escalating into conflict. Is that the galaxy you want to leave to your descendants?" The question hung in the air as the Apex Hunters considered her words. Finally, Ambassador Zixvoth spoke, her tentacles forming patterns that the Admiral's neural translator interpreted as cautious optimism. "I believe," the ambassador said, "that there may be merit in attending this summit. At minimum, it would provide an opportunity to assess human intentions more directly than through intelligence reports and second-hand accounts." "I concur," added General Vers, surprising many in the chamber. "The humans have demonstrated both martial prowess and now diplomatic initiative. Either quality alone would warrant attention. Together, they demand engagement." War Prince Kathavar's crystalline structure shifted through several color patterns before settling on a deep blue. "The Silicon hegemony will attend, if only to ensure our interests are represented in any potential agreements." All eyes turned to Chief Commander Drelzar, whose compound eyes remained fixed on Admiral Kostova. For several long moments he said nothing, his mandibles perfectly still. "You infiltrated our most secure facility," he finally said, "bypassed our defenses, eavesdropped on our deliberations, and then walked in uninvited to deliver a social invitation." "That's an accurate summary, yes," the Admiral acknowledged with a slight nod. To everyone's surprise, the commander's mandibles began to vibrate in what his species considered laughter. "I cannot decide if your species is brilliantly audacious or suicidally reckless. Perhaps both. Very well, Admiral Kostova of Earth. The Arthropodian Confederation will send representatives to your summit. If nothing else, it should prove enlightening." The Admiral managed to keep her expression neutral, though internally she felt a wave of relief. "Excellent. The details are all contained in the invitation I've provided. Transport can be arranged if needed." She gave a formal bow to the assembled representatives. "I thank you for your time and for not, well, immediately executing me for breaching your security. I look forward to more productive discussions at the summit." With that, she turned and began walking toward the chamber doors. "Admiral," called Chief Commander Drelzar, causing her to pause and look back. "How do you intend to leave our facility? The same way you entered?" She smiled. "Actually, Commander, if it's all the same to you, I'd appreciate an escort to my shuttle. It's currently attached to the dark side of your moon, powered down to avoid detection by your perimeter scanners." The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly. "You had an extraction plan all along." "Of course," she replied. "We're reckless, not stupid." 3 weeks later, Admiral Elena Kostova stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, orbiting Earth at Lagrange Point 5. The massive space station, purpose-built for the Galactic Cooperation Summit, glittered against the backdrop of space. Its various modules designed to accommodate the biological needs of dozens of different species. "Quite a view, isn't it?" came a voice from behind her. She turned to see President Rivera approaching, his formal attire indicating he had just come from one of the many preliminary diplomatic meetings taking place ahead of the summit's official opening. "Mr. President," she acknowledged with a respectful nod. "It is indeed hard to believe we built all this in just 18 months. Amazing what humanity can accomplish when properly motivated," he replied, joining her at the viewport. "The first ships from the Apex Hunter Alliance arrived an hour ago. The Arthropodian delegation is already settled in their quarters, and the others are in the process of docking." Admiral Kostova felt a flutter of nervous energy. "And security?" "Tight, but not oppressively so. As you suggested, we're emphasizing cooperation rather than suspicion. Armed personnel are present, but discreet. The quantum scanners are monitoring for any potential threats without being intrusive." She nodded approvingly. "Good. First impressions matter. Speaking of which," the President continued, "Chief Commander Drelzar has requested a private meeting with you before the formal proceedings begin. Apparently, you made quite an impression." The Admiral raised an eyebrow. "Did he say what he wants to discuss?" "No, but his tone was described as respectfully curious rather than hostile." "I think you may have a fan, Admiral." She laughed softly. "Well, that's unexpected. I'll meet with him, of course." "Good." The President turned to face her directly. "Elena, what you did, infiltrating their headquarters, facing down the 7 most powerful military leaders in the galaxy alone, it was either the bravest or the most foolhardy action I've ever authorized. Possibly both." "It worked, didn't it?" she replied with a slight smile. "It did, and history may well record it as the moment that changed humanity's place in the galaxy." He extended his hand. "On behalf of Earth and all human colonies, thank you." She shook his hand firmly. "I just did what any of us would have done, Mr. President. Found a way to turn potential enemies into potential friends." "Humanity, fuck yeah," the President murmured with a small smile. "I beg your pardon, sir?" he chuckled. "Just remembering an old phrase from the early days of our space expansion. Before your time, perhaps. It was a sentiment about human exceptionalism, often shouted enthusiastically if not eloquently." "Ah," she nodded, turning back to the viewport where a massive crystalline vessel, clearly of silicon hegemony design, was approaching one of the docking bays. "Well, perhaps we are exceptional in some ways. Not superior, but different, adaptable. Sometimes reckless, often ingenious, occasionally noble. And now, diplomats," the President added. "Who would have thought?" "You can't just drag an emperor through the halls of the Galactic Senate," hissed Ambassador Krell, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly as he scurried alongside the human diplomat. "Watch me," replied Catherine Walsh, not breaking stride as she maintained her grip on the collar of the most powerful being in the known universe. The Emperor of the 7 Systems, Lord Regent of the Outer Rim, and Protector of the Ancient Ways, was currently being unceremoniously hauled across polished marble floors like a disobedient house pet. This is unprecedented. This is diplomatic suicide." Krell's exoskeleton was clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme distress in Arthrosians. "No, this is what we call cutting through the bullshit," Catherine replied, yanking the Emperor forward when he tried to dig in his heels. 5,000 years of galactic civilization, and you all still can't figure out how to run a meeting efficiently." The Emperor, whose name was technically unpronounceable to human vocal cords and consisted of a series of pheromone bursts, telepathic impulses, and subsonic rumbles, made a sound like a garbage disposal trying to process a spoon. Catherine interpreted this as disapproval and ignored it. Behind them trailed a procession of increasingly panicked alien dignitaries, security personnel who were completely unsure of protocol for this situation, and several holodrones capturing every moment for the billions of beings watching across the galaxy. The footage would later be set to music, remixed, and become the most viewed piece of media in galactic history. But Catherine Walsh wasn't thinking about her impending viral fame. She was thinking about the 17-hour Senate session that had just concluded without a single decision being made, the imminent environmental collapse of 12 inhabited planets, and the headache forming behind her right eye. 3 weeks, she shouted over her shoulder at the trailing diplomatic corps. 3 weeks of preliminary discussions and procedural considerations, while actual planets are literally dying. And what was today? A special session to determine whether we should form a committee to evaluate the possibility of creating a task force to assess the viability of maybe doing something. She yanked the Emperor around a corner, his ornate robes, worth more than the annual GDP of several small nations, dragging on the floor.
Ms.
Walsh, wheezed a tall, reed-thin alien with skin like polished obsidian. There are 10,000 years of diplomatic tradition you're violating right now. Good, Catherine shot back. They clearly aren't working. The whole mess had started 3 standard weeks earlier when Catherine had arrived on Nexus Prime, the artificial planetoid that served as the seat of the Galactic Senate. She'd been sent as Earth's representative after the previous ambassador had suffered a nervous breakdown during a 4-day debate on the proper protocol for addressing a newly evolved sentient fungal colony that had developed along the Senate's waste disposal system. Catherine had been selected primarily because of her reputation for getting things done in impossible situations. She'd negotiated peace between 3 warring nations on Earth while suffering from food poisoning. She'd drafted an entire continental trade agreement during a power outage using only a solar-powered calculator and a stub of pencil. When a visiting alien dignitary had accidentally consumed an entire chocolate cake and gone into anaphylactic shock, she'd saved their life with an improvised medical procedure involving a drinking straw and a bottle of antacids. The Galactic Senate, however, was proving to be her greatest challenge yet. On her first day, she'd sat through a 4-hour welcome ceremony where each of the 317 Senate representatives gave a formal greeting in their native language, followed by the traditional gift exchange which required her to accept and properly acknowledge objects ranging from sentient poetry crystals to what appeared to be a jar of pickled organs. By day 3, she'd realized that every proposal, no matter how urgent or trivial, was first subjected to a reflection period of no less than 5 standard days, followed by a preliminary consideration phase that could last months. By the end of week 1, she'd started bringing stimulants to the sessions, grinding her teeth as representatives debated whether the temperature of the chamber should be adjusted by 0.3 degrees to accommodate the comfort needs of the methane-breathing delegates from Rigel 7. And now, after 3 full weeks of watching planets literally begin to die while the Senate debated whether they should consider thinking about possibly doing something, Catherine Walsh had snapped. "Where exactly are you taking me?" demanded the Emperor, finally finding his voice. His translator caller rendered his complex communication into a crisp, aristocratic accent that somehow managed to convey both boredom and outrage. "To see the consequences of your inaction," Catherine replied, not slowing down. They had reached the grand observation deck of the Senate building, a massive transparent dome that offered a panoramic view of space. Catherine punched a code into the control panel and the dome's display system activated. "Senate Override Protocol, Emergency Observational Status," she announced clearly. The system, recognizing her diplomatic credentials, responded immediately. The dome darkened slightly and then filled with a high-definition real-time feed from the Cygnus sector. The gathered crowd, which had now swelled to include curious senators from at least 40 different species, fell silent. On display was the planet Terulian, once a vibrant blue-green world. Now its atmosphere swirled with angry red storms, massive fissures visible even from orbit cracking its surface. The real-time data scrolling along the edges of the display showed rapidly deteriorating atmospheric conditions, rising radiation levels, and the desperate evacuation efforts underway. "This," Catherine said, finally releasing the Emperor's collar and gesturing broadly at the display, "is happening right now, and it's happening to 11 other planets in systems that fall under your direct protection. The cascade effect that your own scientists predicted 50 years ago is accelerating. These worlds are dying while you debate whether to form a committee." The Emperor straightened his robes with as much dignity as he could muster. "The proper procedures must be—" "Oh, shut up about procedures," Catherine interrupted, causing several dignitaries to gasp. "Do you know what Earth's history teaches us about bureaucratic procedures during crises? They're excellent at documenting tragedies and utterly useless at preventing them." She turned to address the gathered crowd. "Humans have only been part of this galactic community for 30 years. We're newcomers. We respect your ancient traditions and your complex diplomatic protocols. But we also know what it looks like when institutions become so wrapped up in their own processes that they forget their purpose." Pointing at the dying planet on the display, she continued, "That's not a regrettable development requiring further study. That's not an evolving situation that warrants careful consideration. That's a planet dying in real time. Those are billions of lives being extinguished while you debate the proper seating arrangement for the emergency session." A murmur ran through the crowd. Catherine noticed several senators looking uncomfortably at the floor, while others were transfixed by the imagery of the planetary disaster. "The environmental stabilization technology exists," Catherine pressed on. "Earth has shared our atmospheric regeneration systems. The Andromedans have perfected planetary shield technology. The Visians have developed artificial tectonic stabilizers. We have the solutions, but they're sitting in warehouses while you decide which form needs to be filed in triplicate. The Emperor, having recovered some of his composure, drew himself up to his full height, an impressive 2.5 meters. Your passion is noted, Ambassador Walsh. But you must understand that the Galactic Senate has maintained peace and order for 5 millennia, precisely because we do not rush into action based on emotional appeals. With all due respect, Your Eminence, Catherine replied, her voice dripping with a distinct lack of respect. That's utter bullshit. You don't rush into anything. If this Senate chamber was on fire, you'd create a committee to evaluate the historical significance of flames before considering whether to activate the sprinkler system. A strange sound rippled through the gathering, something like laughter from several species, though it manifested as everything from clicks and whistles to subsonic rumbles that made the floor vibrate slightly. You mistake caution for inaction, the Emperor said stiffly. And you mistake process for progress, Catherine shot back. She gestured again to the display. That planet has approximately 72 hours before total collapse. The evacuation efforts can save maybe 40% of the population at current rates. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign an emergency authorization right now, bypassing the Senate procedures, to deploy the stabilization technologies we already have ready. The Emperor's translator collar produced a sound like someone choking on a marshmallow. That would be completely unprecedented. The emergency authorization has never been... There's a first time for everything, Catherine interrupted. Like a human dragging an emperor through the halls of the Senate. Didn't think that would happen today, did you? More of that strange multi-species laughter rippled around the chamber. I cannot simply ignore thousands of years of procedure, the Emperor insisted. Catherine narrowed her eyes. You know what humans are really good at, Your Eminence? Revolutions. When systems fail to serve the people they're meant to protect, we tear them down and build something better. Earth history is full of empires that thought they were eternal right up until they weren't. She stepped closer to the Emperor, lowering her voice. I'm trying to save your procedures by giving you a way to work within them. The emergency authorization exists precisely for situations like this. Use it, or I promise you, the next revolution won't just be procedural. A tense silence fell over the observation deck. The Emperor stared at Catherine, his compound eyes unreadable, but his posture rigid with either outrage or consideration. It was hard to tell with his particular species. Finally, he spoke. Bring me the authorization terminal. 3 days later, Catherine Walsh stood in the Senate chamber as the first reports came in from Tyrolean. The deployment of the combined technologies had halted the planet's deterioration. It wasn't saved. Parts of it would be uninhabitable for generations, but the total collapse had been averted, and the evacuation efforts had expanded significantly with the added resources. Initial readings show atmospheric stabilization at 64% and rising, announced the Tyrolean representative, their voice modulator barely containing their emotion. Tectonic activity has reduced by 78%. The cascade has been halted. A cheer went up from the chamber, or rather, 317 different species versions of cheers, creating a cacophony that the acoustic system struggled to moderate. The Emperor, seated on his ceremonial platform, raised a limb for silence. The chamber quieted immediately. The emergency protocols have served their purpose, he announced. But this situation has exposed significant flaws in our procedural framework. When process becomes more important than purpose, we have lost our way. Catherine, standing at the Earth delegation's podium, caught the Emperor's multifaceted gaze. He inclined his head slightly in what she recognized as acknowledgement. Therefore, the Emperor continued, I am establishing a new position within the Galactic Senate, Emergency Response Coordinator. This individual will have the authority to identify critical situations and implement immediate actions when delay would result in catastrophic consequences. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as representatives conferred with their aides. And I am appointing Ambassador Catherine Walsh of Earth to this position. The murmurs erupted into a full uproar. Catherine stood frozen in shock. When the chamber eventually quieted, the Emperor addressed her directly. Ambassador Walsh, you have demonstrated a unique human quality that I believe this Senate requires. The ability to recognize when tradition must bow to necessity. Will you accept this appointment? Catherine stepped forward to the central speaker's platform. With respect, Your Eminence, I must decline. Now it was the Emperor's turn to look shocked, insofar as his alien features could express such an emotion. I appreciate the offer, Catherine continued, But creating a single position of emergency power isn't the solution. That's just replacing one flawed system with another. What the Senate needs isn't a human showing you how to ignore your procedures when they become inconvenient. What you need is to fix the procedures themselves. She turned to address the entire chamber. Earth has a saying. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Your procedural safeguards were created with good intentions, to prevent hasty decisions, to ensure all voices are heard, to maintain the stability that has kept the peace for millennia. Those are worthy goals. But when the procedures become so cumbersome that they prevent action in the face of disaster, they've failed at their primary purpose, to serve and protect the people of this galaxy. Catherine gestured to the holographic display showing the stabilizing Tyrolean. What we need isn't a position that can bypass procedures. We need procedures that work in the first place. I propose instead a comprehensive reform of the Senate's emergency response protocols, developed collaboratively with representatives from all member worlds, with a focus on maintaining the core values while enabling timely action. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he made a sound that the translator didn't immediately process, a sound that Catherine realized after a moment was laughter. "This," he said finally, "is why humans continue to surprise us. Most species, when offered unprecedented power, grab it with all available appendages. Yet you refuse it in favor of systemic reform that would distribute that power more widely." He tilted his massive head. "Perhaps there is something to this democracy concept your species is so fond of." "Democracy is messy," Catherine admitted, "but it has one advantage over imperial systems. It adapts. When it's working properly, it evolves to meet new challenges." "Very well," the Emperor declared. "A reform commission shall be established immediately, and I do mean immediately, not after the customary 17 preliminary hearings. Ambassador Walsh, you will co-chair this commission with, let me see." He scanned the chamber. "Senator Zorlab of the Unified Cloud Consciousness, known for their efficiency in decision-making." A floating collection of iridescent particles near the chamber ceiling pulsed briefly in acknowledgement. "The commission will have 30 standard days to propose reforms," the Emperor continued. "And to ensure proper motivation." He paused, his compound eyes fixing on Catherine in what she could have sworn was a mischievous expression. "If no proposal is presented within that time frame, Ambassador Walsh is hereby authorized to drag me through the Senate halls again." The chamber erupted in the galaxy's equivalent of laughter. The Reform Commission began work immediately, setting up in a converted conference room that Catherine promptly renamed the War Room. Walls were covered with diagrams, procedural flowcharts, and historical case studies of Senate responses to previous crises. "The issue isn't the values underlying the procedures," Catherine explained to Senator Zorlab during their first session. "It's that the procedures have become ends unto themselves, rather than means to an end." The sentient cloud pulsed in agreement, particles rearranging to form a rough approximation of the flowchart on the wall. "Efficiency without sacrifice of deliberation is the goal," came the translated response, appearing as text on Catherine's neural interface. Over the following weeks, representatives from across the galaxy rotated through the war room, contributing perspectives and raising concerns. The Tlaxian hive mind worried about preserving consensus building. The Quantum Possibilities Collective fretted about the butterfly effects of expedited decisions. The representative from the Silicon Consciousness argued that organic beings were inherently too emotional for crisis management. Catherine listened to them all, incorporating their concerns while gently but firmly steering the conversation away from the procedural quagmire that had paralyzed the Senate for so long. "Look," she said during a particularly contentious session with the Elder Council of Rigid Traditionalists, a species whose name literally translated to "those who prefer things as they were." "We're not throwing out 5,000 years of tradition. We're evolving it, the same way your own species evolved those impressive defensive spines when predators threatened your ancestors." "Our spines took 12 million years to evolve," the elder huffed. "And that worked great for your planet," Catherine replied smoothly. But Tyrolean didn't have 12 million years. It barely had 72 hours. As the deadline approached, Catherine found herself working around the clock, fueled by the Senate cafeteria's approximation of coffee, which tasted more like liquefied mushrooms with a hint of battery acid, and sheer determination. The night before their proposal was due, she stood alone in the war room, staring at the final draft displayed on the holographic projector. Senator Zorlab had dispersed to rest, the cloud's particles needing to realign after days of intense concentration. "You work too hard, Ambassador," came a voice from the doorway. Catherine turned to find the Emperor himself standing there, without his usual entourage of advisors and security. "Your Eminence," she said, too tired to be properly surprised. "Checking up on us before the big presentation?" "Something like that." The Emperor moved into the room with unexpected grace for a being of his size and biological complexity. "I wanted to see this reformer of galaxies in her natural habitat," Catherine snorted. "My natural habitat involves significantly more trees and a lot less political bureaucracy. And yet you navigate our waters as if born to them." The Emperor studied the holographic display. "Will your reforms work?" "They're not my reforms," Catherine corrected. "They're ours. All 317 member species contributed. And yes, I think they will work. They maintain the Senate's commitment to deliberation and consensus while creating a tiered response system for emergencies based on objective threat assessment rather than procedural inertia." The Emperor was quiet for a moment. "You know, in 5,000 years, the Senate procedures have been significantly revised only 7 times. 8th time's the charm," Catherine replied with a tired smile. "What I find most intriguing about humans," the Emperor said, still studying the hologram, "is not your adaptability or your ingenuity, though those are impressive. It's your impatience." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Most species don't consider that a compliment." "Most species don't understand its value," the Emperor countered. "The rest of the galaxy measures time in millennia. You measure it in heartbeats. It makes you disruptive. But perhaps that disruption is what we need." He turned his massive head to look directly at her. "Your homeworld has a concept I find fascinating. Catalyst. A substance that enables change without itself being consumed in the process." "That's us," Catherine agreed. "Humans. The universal catalyst. We show up and suddenly everyone's moving at 10 times their normal speed just to keep up." The Emperor made a sound that the translator rendered as a chuckle. "Indeed. Tomorrow you will present these reforms to the Senate. They will be debated, of course." "Of course," Catherine interjected dryly. "But I suspect they will pass with surprising speed." The Emperor moved toward the door, then paused. "I am grateful that I did not have to imprison you for the unprecedented offense of imperial dragging." Catherine grinned. "Would you really have done that?" The Emperor's compound eyes glittered. "No, but don't tell anyone. It would ruin my fearsome reputation." With that, he departed, leaving Catherine alone with her holographic reforms and the distinct feeling that she'd just experienced something few in the galaxy ever had. An imperial joke. The presentation the next day went exactly as the Emperor had predicted. The reforms were debated vigorously but respectfully. Several conservative factions raised concerns about the expedited emergency protocols, but these were countered by footage from the barely stabilized Terulian and 11 other worlds now receiving emergency assistance. When the final vote came, the reforms passed with an overwhelming majority. Catherine stood at the central platform, Senator Zorlab floating beside her, as the Emperor officially signed the new protocols into galactic law. "The Senate recognizes that evolution is not merely a biological process, but an institutional necessity," the Emperor declared, his words being simultaneously translated into over 3,000 languages across the galaxy. "These reforms honor our traditions while ensuring they serve their ultimate purpose: the protection and prosperity of all sentient life." The ceremony concluded with the traditional Senate adjournment ritual, which Catherine had learned involved each representative touching a ceremonial crystal in the center of the chamber. Given that some species lacked physical appendages and others could only touch objects through specialized protective gear, this took nearly 2 hours. As the chamber finally began to empty, Catherine found herself approached by a group of younger representatives from various worlds. "Ambassador Walsh," began a reptilian delegate whose scales shifted through rainbow hues as they spoke, "we wanted to express our admiration for your direct approach." "What Representative Zis means," added a levitating orb of gelatinous material, "is that you've inspired us to form an informal coalition. We're calling ourselves the Catalysts, in honor of your Earth concept." Catherine looked at the diverse group, young by their respective species' standards, but representing civilizations far older than humanity's entire existence. "What does this coalition do?" she asked. "We push," replied a crystalline being whose voice resonated like wind chimes. "When the Senate begins to calcify, we push. When procedures become barriers instead of frameworks, we push. We remember Terulian, and we push." Catherine felt an unexpected surge of emotion. This, she realized, was how change happened. Not just through dramatic moments of dragging emperors through halls, but through inspiring others to push in their own ways. Well, she said, finding her voice. Push wisely, and when necessary, push hard. 6 months later, Catherine stood on the observation deck, watching a very different view of Terulian. The planet was still scarred, but the angry red storms had subsided. Green was returning to portions of the surface. The evacuation had ended, and reconstruction had begun. But more importantly, when a similar crisis had emerged in the Vega sector 2 months earlier, the Senate's new emergency protocols had kicked in immediately. Response teams had deployed within hours, not weeks. The planet had been stabilized with minimal damage and no loss of life. "Admiring your handiwork?" came a now familiar voice. Catherine turned to see the Emperor approach, his ceremonial robes replaced by what passed for casual attire among his species, which still looked like it belonged in a museum of fine art. "Admiring our handiwork," she corrected. "It took all of us. But it took one human to drag us there," the Emperor noted, sometimes literally. Catherine smiled. "It's become quite the cultural phenomenon, I hear. There are memes?" "Indeed. My favorite depicts me with what your species calls cartoon eyes, spiraling in confusion as you pull me along. My dignity may never recover. A small price to pay for saving billions of lives." The Emperor made a gesture of solemn agreement. "The Galactic Historical Archives have officially named it the Walsh Protocol." "The what now?" Catherine blinked in surprise. "Not the reforms themselves. Those are properly attributed to the entire Senate. But the concept of direct intervention when systems fail has been codified as the Walsh Protocol. It will be taught to diplomatic cadets for generations to come." Catherine wasn't quite sure how to feel about that. "I hope they emphasize that dragging emperors should be a last resort." "Oh, absolutely. The official wording specifically notes that imperial dragging should occur only in cases of catastrophic procedural paralysis." The Emperor's compound eyes seemed to twinkle. "Though I've installed smoother flooring in the Senate halls, just in case." Catherine laughed, then turned serious as she looked back at the recovering planet. "Will it last? After I'm gone? After you're gone? Will the reforms hold? Or will the Senate slowly drift back into procedural quicksand?" The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. "All systems entropy over time. It is the nature of the universe. But you've done something more important than implementing reforms." "What's that?" "You've reminded us why we created the Senate in the first place. Not to preserve tradition for tradition's sake, but to serve life in all its forms across the galaxy." The Emperor gestured to the viewport where Terulian slowly rotated. "And you've created your catalysts, who I suspect will be dragging my successors through halls for many generations to come." Catherine smiled at that. "Good. Every Emperor needs a good dragging now and then. Keeps you grounded." "Indeed." The Emperor turned to leave, then paused. "The Senate has approved your request for leave, by the way. Your ship to Earth departs tomorrow." "Thank you. It's been an interesting diplomatic posting." "Ambassador Walsh," the Emperor said formally, "the galaxy will be watching Earth with great interest in the coming centuries. Your species moves quickly, thinks quickly, acts quickly. You disturb the careful equilibrium we've maintained for millennia." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Is that a warning?" "No," the Emperor replied. "It is gratitude. Equilibrium without adaptation is just stagnation dressed in fancy robes." He made a gesture that in his culture signified profound respect. "Safe journey home, Catalyst." As he departed, Catherine turned back to the viewport, watching the stars beyond Terulian. Somewhere out there was Earth, still new to this vast galactic community, still finding its way among civilizations older than humanity's recorded history. "Humanity, fuck yeah," she whispered to herself, smiling at the old internet meme that had somehow become Earth's unofficial motto among the diplomatic corps. Then she straightened her uniform and headed for the Senate chamber, where a coalition of catalysts was waiting to learn how to properly drag the galaxy forward. Years later, in diplomatic academies across the galaxy, new recruits would study the Terulian incident and watch footage of a human diplomat dragging an emperor through the halls of the Senate. Instructors would point out the moment when the galaxy's most ancient institution was forced to remember its purpose. And in the Great Hall of the Senate itself, a small plaque was installed on the exact spot where Catherine Walsh had first grabbed the Emperor's collar. The inscription, written in standard galactic, read simply, "Sometimes, progress requires a good dragging." Humans visiting the Senate would often stop to take pictures with the plaque, making ridiculous dragging poses while their alien colleagues watched with a mixture of amusement and respect. And occasionally, when Senate proceedings would begin to drift into procedural quagmire, a representative would silently stand and walk to that plaque, placing a hand, or tentacle, or sensory appendage upon it. The chamber would immediately fall silent, remembering, and then, inevitably, they would get back to the business of serving life rather than tradition. After all, no one wanted to be dragged next. The end.